Great, okay. So let's see what we've got from the live stream first. Let's go to our live stream questions first. This is where I've got to find my Slack app and open it up. Okay, so the first question is from Grace Lambert-Smith. She has a question for Anna. So, Anna, you alluded to organisational structures where UX can sit. She's curious for people's experiences and opinions of whether content design typically belongs in the design team or marketing. Does it matter? And are there any pros and cons of each?
Yeah, personally, I don't think it's a marketing thing, because you need to work with the people that are working on the product. So it's like massively a process question, I think. Yeah, so definitely not marketing, but product design, whatever it's called in your organization.
Any, do you two have opinions on this? To share the same opinion?
I'm trying to think, because I think for all the teams I've been a part of, content's been in the design team, but I will say that magic happened when I was able to build really, really close relationships with marketing. I used to be really at odds with them, because I was all like, oh my gosh, but what if you do the work that now you did it, you did the research and we didn't, Like I was real scarcity mindset. And then I had to get over myself and just be like, we're all trying to do the work, and to a customer or to a user, they don't, it's all one team. So when I was able to get really, really tight with a marketing manager, there's a marketing manager in particular, we used to have one-on-ones and sync up on the work, and then all of a sudden, her team's work, my team's work, it all became a lot better because we were sharing stories and talking about strategies to be closer with product and things like that.
And I mean, I agree that, content design and UX writing, that type of content does more belong in design or in a product org. However, one of the things I've noticed is when content people start to get a little bit, because oftentimes we're so jockeying for position in our organizations, sometimes it can be well, no, I'm not that thing. That thing's bad and my thing's good. And I think that's actually a really toxic mindset for people who are working in content, to start looking at oh, well, my content stuff is more important or more interesting, or it's more this is user-centered and therefore good, but the marketing stuff isn't therefore bad. Because ultimately it's you are working in the same organization toward theoretically the same goals. And I think we're lying to ourselves if we tell ourselves that a lot of content design work is not also have some aspects of marketing to it. And so I think it's very healthy to kind of take a step back from some of that turf war sort of mentality, because I think also we don't like it when people do it to us. And sometimes when things are done to you, you start to treat other people in that way. And that I think doesn't lead us anywhere good.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about the close working relationship. And accepting that you're all working towards the same goal. Great. Okay, so the next question is for Shannon, and this is from Virginia. And she said, your talk got me wondering about your suggestions for content professionals who are having trouble identifying or accessing opportunities where they are, either due to privilege or access or time or any other obstacle that might feel insurmountable. So I guess, do you have any advice for those?
I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is really I think it goes back to some of the stuff that Sara was talking about really kind of thinking about what's inside and outside of your control. And that might be in your immediate team or at your broader company. Because some of the opportunities that I've had to grow my career, sometimes it was by looking outside of my company and upskilling and doing things to position myself to leave to get a different job that more aligned with my values and what I was looking for. Some of the stuff that I do now too, I'm I need something outside of just my day job to give me energy. So a lot of times too now, I on purpose look for and seek out opportunities that might be in the community or might not be directly related to my day job. But yeah, I think a lot of it too, it just comes down to kind of that honest assessment of where you are and how you're being treated. I've left toxic jobs before. And ultimately it came down to I didn't have opportunities for the things I wanted to do or what I wanted to learn, or there were things about the culture that were really taking a toll on me personally and what I stood for. which also in and of itself, like sometimes it's a privilege to be able to walk away from a job. But I think, yeah, just kind of assessing what can you do here? How much of it do you just need to bide your time? And then, yeah, where else, how else can you potentially look for things?
Great. And there's sort of a follow-up question actually to all of you from Lorna. And she said, there's a question gone now. Shannon's, we sort of touched upon privilege and power and using it to amplify people with less of both, but didn't really kind of go into it that deeply. But she's interested to hear from all of the panel about different ways that you've done that and what's worked or what hasn't worked to help amplify other people. So, yeah, does anyone want to kick off on that one?
I'll start by saying that I think it's fundamentally like, we're, you know, this is a content leaders conference and people here are at different levels, and some of you may be very senior in your orgs and some of you may be less so. But I think that it's very much like, I look at it as sort of a responsibility that once I felt like I sort of had moved up a little bit in my career, felt like I had a little bit of footing, or felt like I knew people, my network was stronger. I think of that as like, okay, this is your time to start looking for those opportunities. And one of the things I will say, because I work with a lot of people who would like to do that, but sometimes feel scared. And one of the things I notice is that sometimes if you have an identity that experiences some facets of marginalization, and you work in a field that experiences some facets of marginalization, so like for example, being a white woman working in content, there are aspects of it I've experienced some real misogyny, and there's a whole bunch of privilege that I hold. And working in content, it's like I've been left out of a lot of stuff, and also I've done well for myself. So one of the things I think is actually very important to identify those opportunities is actually if you're able to get outside of yourself a little bit and recognize that like you can get so focused on the ways in which you are marginalized or the ways in which you don't have power, and to actually step out and say like, wait a second, what are the ways in which I do have power? Where do I have power? Where has my power shifted? Because I find that sometimes our sense of our own power lags behind reality because we're still in sort of a prior version of self. Like we imagine ourselves as that like person who is like at risk, vulnerable, early career, whatever. We kind of imagine ourselves like a little behind. So I'd say like take a moment and actually step up outside of yourself and be like, what has, not do I have power? Different question. Do I have power? It's very easy to be like, no, because I can name all the reasons I don't have power, right? These are all the reasons that I don't actually have control. But where do I have power, or what power do I have now? It actually helps you find the spaces where you are going to have the most opportunity. And so looking for how you can help people who have less power than you in those specific places is how I would start to identify those opportunities. So it's like, I knew, for example, I don't have like organizational power because I don't work at some big tech company, and I don't have the privilege that comes along with having that like I don't have like a LinkedIn profile that says like X Meta, X Airbnb, whatever, right? No shade if you do. I don't have that LinkedIn profile, but I do have other things, right? And so I have to think about like, okay, I can get people, for example, I spoke at a lot of events. Sometimes I would get invited to things I couldn't do. Who was I going to pass that to? Who was I going to recommend who maybe wasn't going to get an invite otherwise? Because that was a space where I had power. That's what I.
If we have time, I have an example.
Yeah,
Rachel.
right.
Yeah. One example that comes to mind for me as a manager and how we approach performance reviews in the US and the companies I've worked in, there's a process called calibrations. So managers get in a room together and you're sharing feedback and discussing the performance of various folks on a team. And there have been situations where in those rooms, I literally have access to an audience and I have a certain position of authority in there. So in times where people were trying to like, oh, this content designer needs to scale their impact more, being able to voice concerns that they have raised to me and echo and amplify and say, hey, I actually have some more detail about that. So-and-so described this situation and here's what it led to, yada, yada, yada. So being able to bring those stories in and give credit to this person had this idea, this person did this thing, they've had these conversations, that's been part of it. The other part of it as a manager is calling out places where it's beyond the individual to fix a situation or a problem. We were pinning so much of this person needs to amplify their impact. And I was like, no, actually, all of us managers need to commit to doing better prioritization for this person so they know what work to not focus on and where are the areas where they can go deeper. It wasn't a matter of needing to roll out more office hours or could you just host 5 more workshops. They needed to be able to be given the space and the time to refocus their work. And so I think about that too, in kind of that, again, taking the burden off a person and calling out, actually, there's a process, there's a system, there's something else that's factoring into where and how this person is able to show up.
That's a great example. Great, okay, thank you. I have got a question for Anna here from Pia. Were there any downsides to saying no in your example you shared?
No.
That was a quick one. I've got another one for you, Anna, actually.
Yeah, go on.
Did you want to elaborate on that at all?
I'm thinking. Nothing that actually comes to mind. I think it's, obviously I realize it can be difficult, and I realize also that it's not easy or maybe even possible, depending on the support you have in your company, or if you have a manager, for example, that doesn't agree with that. So I realize that depends. But I think it's like trying to find your way into rephrasing maybe the question instead of asking if. So maybe there's another way of doing that. But no, I don't think there were any downsides to that, to be honest.
Okay. I've got 2 quite similar ones here actually, Anna, for you from people who want to know, what about if you don't have a lead or a content design manager and you just have the individual contributors? What can they do themselves to get to a more focused content design setup?
Well, obviously, then they should go to their manager, which is not then the content design manager. But I think it's about also putting some pressure on this person. How can you help us prioritizing? And not, again, it's about the question, how you phrase it. It's not, it would be nice if we didn't do all of these things. It would be, okay, so how can we do this thing, do the real work? Because obviously we can't do that now. Or if you have specific ideas, but we really need help with this thing. But obviously it all comes down to having a manager that supports you. But I think it's not asking, can you please? It's how can you help us with this?
Yeah. Something?
Yeah, of course, please.
It's so, I think you said something before about you can't always say no. And one of the things I actually try to tell people is to really reframe it as no, you can always say no. As in you can, it's always a choice. It may not be the best choice. It is a choice that has trade-offs. But I think we get ourselves wrapped up into these places where it's well, this is impossible because I can't say no because, and we'll kind of go all through all the reasons we can't do it. And what I'll say is okay, I can say no. I'm afraid that if I say no, these are the things that are going to happen. Because now you have something to work with, right? Because if you just say, I can't say no, that's impossible, then you just kind of shuts you down. Say, okay, I'm afraid if I say no, these are my risks. And then you can go through those and say, okay, how real are those? Why do I think those are risks? Have I actually seen those things happen? Is that something that I've really worked up in my head? How might I evaluate it? How might I mitigate the risks? How might I ask for support, specific support from my manager to help minimize those risks? So it kind of opens up your brain, and then it opens up a conversation versus getting stuck in the I can't say no, which is I think where it's very, very easy because it feels like that when you're oh, what you're actually saying is if I say no, I am afraid I will get in trouble in some way. And then that you need to kind of unpack that belief, and that I think is a way to open it up.
I think it's also about being clear. I mean, if you want us to do all of these things, we're not going to be able to do this and this and this. Or, we can do that, but then we're not going to do it really. I mean, so I think it's also about being clear. It's not you have to evangelize. It's well, the fact is, obviously we can't do all of these things at the same time. So it's what do you want us to do? You choose.
Yeah.
I would also say if you can phone a friend, it might not be your direct manager. I was in a situation where there was a design program manager, so a project manager, and they ended up being a really big ally and helper for my content design team that I was working with, because they were closer to the work, they were closer to the product managers, to the design leads in that area. And once they understood, and they could see it too, they were I think you all are on too much work. And I was like, yes, we are. But she helped me gut check the calls that I wanted to make around where should we focus the team, what should we pull them off of. And then she also helped to socialize that decision. And it wasn't a question of if we're going to pull people off of work, it was how are we going to support this big priority over here? Oh, we're going to shift people from this thing and this thing over here. We're going to all swarm this one shared thing. So sometimes going around and kind of operating outside of like your direct like reporting structure, even sometimes like your direct team, I've found that can be really helpful in having people also help make the case. And then it's not you going to them saying, oh, can we do this or can we have this? It's them coming back and saying, I hear that we need to approach it like this. So here's what I've recommended. How does that sit with y'all? Great, let's do it.
Like everybody deserves a good manager, but like you don't always have one. Some managers are not great. Some managers are unprepared. Some managers are burned out themselves. Some managers, whatever, right? And I just think it's so helpful to kind of reframe that and be like, okay, if I'm not getting what I need from my manager, okay, you're not going to get everything because they're human. So thinking about it as like, I think about like what's like sort of the crew. Lara Hogan does a lot of leadership work with engineers. She calls it your manager Voltron, but it's like really identifying like who are the people that I turn to for different aspects of support. And particularly if you don't have a good manager right now, or if you have a manager who doesn't get what you do, building out that cast of characters and identifying like, what are the things that they can help me with, or what are the things that they know about that I need, or what are the ways in which they can be allies or sponsors for me is so helpful, because otherwise, again, you get in that spot where you're like, well, I can't do anything because my manager isn't supporting me. And to say like, okay, like there's some stuff that you won't be able to do because your manager isn't supporting you, but what can you do by identifying those other people?
Great. Well, we're almost at time, but I'm going to squeeze in one more question. Shannon, this one's for you, and it's a question around have you got any tips for easing into that slightly different mindset when you move into leadership? So you're going from like maybe moving into scoping and prioritizing and enabling others rather than actually doing the execution. So have you got any tips for like kind of just changing that mindset?
Ooh. Give yourself a break. I remember being so caught up in, I've got to do it perfect. Oh my gosh, I too am a fraud. I'm going to get found out for, I was this content designer, now I snuck over here. I'm a UX manager. Oh my gosh. But I think part of it was learning to just let myself learn and really embracing that. I also think what was really helpful for me, two things. One, I got my crew involved. So as I was talking to my design leads, my manager, and starting to express interest in, I'd like to try this, I'd like to do that, they were able to work with me to set up opportunities. And we also, the second part to that was, we did it in baby steps. So my transition into taking on more of a leadership role, particularly once I was in content design and UX, I raised my hand for, I would like to lead a project. And my design lead said, perfect. Actually, there's a project coming up in a couple weeks. You're going to lead it. And that means you're going to manage all the client or the stakeholder relationships. You're going to give feedback to the team and coach them through this deliverable. And then from there, it kind of just was this snowball effect of, I've given you one project, now can you run two at a time? Mm-hmm. Hey, I see that you did this great job doing all of this. So then my design lead, they went on parental leave and they said, I'm going to name you as our interim design lead because I've seen how you show up with our partners. I've seen how you're guiding our work. You've got this. But he didn't just like, it wasn't just a like, oh, I want more leadership. And then tomorrow, oh yeah, look, you're the interim design lead now. We really paced it and did small things leading up to that. And even like getting up on stage here, like, I didn't just wake up one day and go, gosh, I'm going to speak at conferences and it's just going to go like that. I did a lot of really small, like lightning talks, like 10, 15 minutes max, internal presentations. Again, it was like taking this big thing and breaking it down into very small steps that were a little bit more manageable and then gave me lots of time to practice and not do things great and then get better.
Great. Baby steps, everybody. Okay, so just before we wrap for lunch, can we please just give our amazing three speakers here another round of applause?